Just talk about it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out.
I got to tell you, Jerry, that song, still to this day when I hear it, it sends chills down my spine. I love that song.
Chills is the right word.
Well, no, it is, because it takes me back. It takes me so back.
Well, good.
To my younger days, and of course to your younger days. By the way, June 2nd, just last weekend, Jerry celebrated his 71st birthday.
Thank you very much. I keep telling myself it's the 21st, but nobody believes me.
So we're going to open up the floor to questions.
Okay.
But I want to ask you a few questions myself. I get to do that, right? Because I've got control of the microphone. My name is Mike Balsam. I do some local television here with Your TV and a new program on Giant TV as well. But it's not about me. It's about Jerry Mathers. And Jerry, 234 episodes of Leave It to Beaver, the original series.
Absolutely, 6 years. So we did 39 a year, and then we take off, usually about a month and a half or 2 months, sometimes less than that, and then we'd go back and we'd go to New York and Chicago and LA and do PR for the next season, and then we do 39 weeks again.
Wow, that's a long season. They don't do it like that anymore.
No, now if you get an order for like 6 or 7, especially for a new series, and maybe you've been on 3 or 4 years, you might get 20, but 39 a year is what they used to do. That's why it actually has been on for so long, because it's called stripping it, but what stripping means is they show it every day, so it can show for quite a while, 5 days a week, and before you go back to the original episode.
Well, I was born in 62, and I know the series ended the following year in 63, correct?
That's right.
So, as I say, I grew up watching it because it was in constant reruns.
Well, it's the longest running show in television history.
It's amazing.
It hasn't been off the air since 1957. It plays in 30 languages all over the world. So it doesn't play in all those 30 languages still, but it plays in a lot of them. The only interesting thing I really find is the only place that's an English-speaking country that if I go there, nobody knows because it wasn't allowed to be shown was England.
Really? Why?
Because the English BBC, not Canadian, but just the English one, said it was an unrealistic showing of American families and it would give the British people the wrong idea.
Can we talk a little bit about its portrayal of the American family at the time?
Well, I think, all the episodes in there originally come from real life. So they weren't just people, it's not a joke show. If you watch a lot of the shows today, it's set up, joke. Leave It to Beaver. If you do something wrong, it's through a child's eyes, it's through the beaver's eyes. And if you do something wrong, there are consequences. So it teaches you some very, very good life lessons. The two writers between them, Joe Conley and Bob Mosier, had about 13 kids. So they had a lot of places to draw the things. And most of the episodes, not everyone, but most of them, in a lot of the things that happened on the show actually happened to real kids. So it was the kind of thing that actually people did those things. It just wasn't to go in there and say, oh, we've got a joke about this, so do that. No, it was things that really happened to kids.
As a young kid growing up watching the show, I think that was probably the appeal to me, is that it was really the first program where the kid was the main character, and I was able to experience his relationship with Larry Mondello and Tooey and Whitey, and also his relationship with Wally. I had an older brother. I still have an older brother.
Hopefully.
He's 11 and a half years older than me.
Okay.
And I know there wasn't a similar divide between Beaver and Wally, but it was very evident that Wally was that much more mature.
You know what I think
Beaver.
An interesting thing is, Leave It to Beaver, when it was actually first made, was made as an adult show. So it wasn't on until like 8 or 9 o'clock on the original run. And then when it went into reruns, it became so much more popular because it was so popular with kids. But children, that weren't up at like 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night, never saw it until it went into reruns. And it's the longest running show in television history. plays all over the world. I speak Japanese. In Japan, it's really a little weird, though, because they have a little girl dub my voice. Now, that's all right for the first 2 or 3 years, but by the end, I'm 14. I'm speaking Japanese with a girl's voice.
There was certainly an innocence to everything that happened on that show,
Yep.
and that was a great factor of its appeal.
Well, I think a lot of the appeal, too, is most of those things, in fact, all of them, in some way, happened to kids. So that just wasn't, you see some of the shows today, they're joke shows, and they just tell jokes. Beaver, there's always, if you do something, there are consequences. If you own up to it, the consequences are a lot less. Everybody knows people like Lumpy and Eddie Haskell. Everybody's had an Eddie Haskell somewhere in their life, unless you're Eddie Haskell, and then I don't want to know you.
Well, but you bring up Eddie Haskell. I mean, I still use that phrase to describe somebody. You know, I might be someone I'm working with, someone who is dating my younger sister. I'll say, be careful, that's an Eddie Haskell.
That's
a certain
a bad
generation
thing.
knows.
As long as they don't say you're an Eddie Haskell.
No, that's right. So, but that's another character, even though, you know, the innocence wasn't there for Eddie.
Let me
That's
tell
another
you,
character
the
that
interesting thing about him is, in real life, he is a very, very big American patriot, totally different than Eddie Haskell. He's a decorated Los Angeles police officer. He's a motorcycle cop. He's been shot in the line of duty. And they said, okay, well, you know, you can take a retirement now, because he said, no, I'm a cop. I'm going back out in the streets. So he's down in the worst parts of LA. He's retired now because he's too old, but they had to practically drag him off his motorcycle. But he's an American hero. And of all the people on the show, everybody says, oh, well, that had to be Wally. Nope, that's Eddie.
Now, talking about post-program life, you served in the U.S. Army Reserve.
Well, I was in the Air Force and
Air
then
Force.
the Reserves. I spent 2 years in the Air Force, and I was in the Reserve, so it was a total of 6 years. And my dad was the actual he retired as a colonel, and he was the Air Force recruiter for the Academy. But I just got into the regular Air Force. I never went to the Academy or anything like that, but we were an Air Force family.
Talk about that rumor that flew around that you had passed away in Vietnam.
Well, you know, there was a lot of contention about the war in Vietnam, and I gave out an Emmy in, I think it was about 1966 or 67, and I was in the service at the time. And people said, oh, you can't wear your uniform. I said, this is what I'm doing now. That's what I'm going to do. So I gave out the Emmy in uniform. And there were a lot of people, and some of them may be here today, but there were a lot of very anti-war people at that time. And they just immediately, like within a few days of giving out the Emmy, people started saying, well, you know, he died in Vietnam. And, you know, when people say you've died, it's kind of hard to no, I didn't. But, you know, that was a big story. That I was still alive didn't make it at all.
You and Paul McCartney, both dead, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Prior to Leave It to Beaver, you had appeared in about somewhere along the lines of about 10 movies, including one that was directed by Alfred Hitchcock.
I worked with Alfred Hitchcock. He was a really, honestly, good friend of mine, because I did a movie with him. It was Shirley MacLaine's also first movie. But I would go, and we went to Vermont to do it. So I would sit on, you know, people say, oh, he's very scary, and actors are very afraid of him. I used to sit on his lap, and I'd study my lines with him, and he'd say it like this. So, and when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, he was doing Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And so I would see him, you know, at the commissary, and he'd always say, hello, Mr. Mathers. First person that ever called me Mr. I was going, is he talking to my dad? My dad's not here. No, that's me. Oh, hi, Mr. Hitchcock. But very nice man.
What was it like in 1983 getting back together with much of the original cast to do the Still the Beaver movie?
The new Leave It to Beaver and Still the Beaver. It was really fun because they're all really good friends of mine. But it's like people maybe you went to school with. You know, you lose track of them. And even if you want to keep, you know, you may call them at Christmas or on birthdays. But all of a sudden I got to go back and work with all of them again. So it was just a really fun experience. And if a lot of you go, the new Leave It to Beaver, you'll love this. I spent 6 years of my life There's another 200 episodes. I had 2 sons, like Wally and the Beaver. We even got Tony Dow, Wally, was married and had daughters, so we had people that were girls, so it just wasn't the boys that were always getting into mischief. 234 episodes, and they lost them. It was a joint deal between Universal and Ted Turner, and each one says that they have the originals, and both of them say, nope, the other person has it, and it showed one time on Turner Broadcast and has never been seen again. And, you know, it's the way it goes, but it was a little disappointing because, you know, I spent 6 years of my life going back, and it was supposed to be that it was going to be a half hour of the old Leave It to Beaver and then a half hour of the new Leave It to Beaver. But maybe someday they'll find it. It's got to be someplace. Somebody knows where it is.
I was telling someone earlier today when I mentioned to this person that I was going to be doing this Q&A session with you. I sat down this morning and looked up the movie, Still the Beaver, and I started watching some of it. And that moment when you walked into the old home and started walking around reminiscing, and the flashbacks went back to Leave It to Beaver.
The original show, yes.
And especially your relationship with your father, played by Hugh Beaumont. I actually started to cry.
Well,
I did.
He was really an interesting person because most people say, you know, you're so good on this show, the way he would talk to you. Well, what he really was a Methodist minister. And after World War II, he was a conscientious objector, but he was, because of his religious views, he would go down and basically minister to the drunks in L.A. And there's a part of L.A., Skid Row, and he would go down there, but they couldn't afford to have a pastor. So he became Michael Shane. Now, maybe most of you are a little too young to know Michael Shane. It used to be Michael Shane was it wasn't a B movie, it was a short that they would run, and sometimes it's on early morning television in black and white. He was this really hard-nosed detective, and he would go up to people if he wanted information, he'd pound them on the wall. And then when we started Leaving to Beaver, people going, that's Michael Shane? Oh, Beaver, oh no. But he was just the nicest guy and a Methodist minister, and only started to be an actor so that he could support his ministry down in Skid Row.
You were also very vocal throughout your life about how much it meant to work with Barbara Billingsley and how much you looked up to her.
She was just the nicest person. She was a New York model, and she married a very, very prominent surgeon in L.A., and she lived in Beverly Hills and was very, very much, honestly, like June Cleaver. She was, you know, a great cook and just a wonderful mother to her 2 sons, but also a great mentor. And so, you know, and she did keep Tony and I in line. You know, we were kids, so we'd fool around. She'd go, we're working now. Oh, that meant no more of that.
Was it difficult in your home life to reconcile, you know, the family life, the parents that you had on Leave It to Beaver, with your family life with your own parents? And was there ever any kind of, I don't know, spillover from one to the other?
No, there wasn't much spillover because luckily I'm the oldest in my family, so I was the Wally. So I have a sister and brothers, and so I was the Wally in my family. So the hard part was going to the studio and having to be Beaver and have Wally and his friends say, do that and do that. But no, I was very lucky. My dad was, you know, a counselor and a superintendent, so he was really good with dealing with kids. I have a sister and 3 brothers, so I'm the oldest, but I came from a big family, so you know, we weren't any different when we got home than any other family. I mean, it wasn't that I was the actor, and my brothers and sisters they never had a series, but they worked in the industry a few times. But I had a wonderful childhood, probably the best education you can ever get. I'm a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley. I have a degree in philosophy, but for the 1st grade till the 8th grade, and this was a little before Leave It to Beaver, I had, by doing other shows, private tutors. So I basically had a wonderful education. The good part about it was some of the things I wasn't so good at, that teacher could say, oh, he hasn't got this yet. So I had that teacher tell me, this is how you do that, and I'd figure it out. And so by the time I graduated and went into high school, because Leave It to Beaver ended when I was in the 8th grade, I went into high school and I was basically a star student because I had such a good foundation to build on.
How does one go from being in probably one of the most important television series of its time
Well, thank you very
back
much.
into high school at that point in time as this icon who's been on everyone's televisions?
Well,
We didn't have as much choice back then as we do today as far as what we were watching.
Well, it honestly wasn't that hard for me. I really didn't even think about it. I went back into high school, and the good part for me was Leave It to Beaver, and we ran for 6 seasons, so there's 234 episodes, but luckily it happened to end when I was going from elementary school to high school. So it wasn't like I came in and did like 2 years of elementary school and I had to go back. It was everybody, and the high school I went to was a high school, a private high school, because my dad had been one of the coaches there. He retired as a superintendent, but I'd always wanted to go to this high school. So it was Notre Dame High School. The first thing I did was I got on the football team. Well, when you're on the football team, you know all the best people, but you also, because we practiced with the varsity, I knew all the varsity seniors. People say, hey, that's the Beaver. And they go, what'd you call him? That's Jerry. So I got along fine.
Did you make some of those typical Beaver types of mistakes when you were growing up? As
not as
you did
many,
on the show?
maybe as a lot of other people. You have to remember, well, in high school, I may have made some of them, but when I was on the set, basically, I had 150 people that not only were they like parents, but their job depended. I mean, if I were to get in an accident or, whatever, so it was just a really nice family set. And the producers went to a lot of trouble to make sure that they had all people that were, very, very nice. And, it was known that if you worked on our show, you were one of the best of the best.
Maybe you can open it up to the floor if you have some questions. Yes?
Yes, ma'am. It was very good the whole time, and they never really canceled it. What we did is we signed a contract for 6 years, and that's what we did. And there's 234 episodes. And at the end of the 6 years, I was just getting ready to go to high school, and Tony was ready to go to college. I had never been to a regular school. I had a private tutor from this first grade, not from Leave to Beaver, but from the movies that I was on, to from the second grade on Leave to Beaver all the way till the 8th grade. So we just decided that we'd had enough. They can show now, and it's still on. It's the longest running TV show in television history. It's never been off the air since 1957. But they can show almost a show a day, and then with some of the things that they have like holidays and things, and run it for a whole year. So I don't know how many people have watched it more than once, but I'm sure a lot of them have.
It was also, from what I understand, one of the first television programs where they actually wrote a finale to close off the series.
We did. We knew that it was coming to an end. As I say, I was going to go into high school. Tony was going to go into college. Barbara and Hugh, they were very, very... Barbara was a New York model. She had 2 kids of her own. Kind of coincidentally, they were just about... Her younger son was 2 years older than me, and her older son was a year older than Tony, so she was very used to it. Hugh Beaumont was a Methodist minister and really got into acting just because he wanted to, be able to preach. And so working on a series was great because he had, he could preach on the weekends. So everybody on the show was very, very much like their character. I didn't really get into that much mischief, but probably my mother or my wife would say I did.
Another question? Yes? That's a great question.
You know what? I just really liked it. It was something I knew that I wasn't going to get a doctorate in it, but I loved reading it. I loved seeing the different ideas. And when you say philosophy, there's quite a few different parts of it. And I just really liked that, the mind expansion, and I mean that in the very best of ways, of being able to think about thinking and seeing how people had lived and learning about ethics and logic. One of my favorites was logic. It was one of the hardest ones for me, but when I did crack it, which took a while, it was something that I really, really liked. So it was just a fun subject. I honestly was a very, very good, although I was an actor and people thought I would be a better speaker, I was actually a very good writer. And so a lot of times when I would read something, I got very good grades at it. I'm a graduate of Berkeley, but it was just a fun time in my life.
Yes, sir.
I've always wondered about it. You were speaking of rumors before. The rumor I heard in the early 70s, mid-70s, when I was a child going to school, was that Alice Cooper used to be you.
Yes.
I remember that one. Yeah.
I was never Alice Cooper, though. I don't know how that one started, but yes, a lot of people did say that. I've seen him in costume, and I don't think he looks much like me, but it'd be hard to tell. I have met him, and he's a very nice man, and he doesn't know either. He says, I don't know if he did or not, he says he never really said. He said that one time when they asked him, because some of you may not know him, but he is a rock and roll person, but he's not a regular rock and roll person. And regular rock and roll, he's even a little farther out than that. And he said, well, what kind of a life did you have? Because look at you now. And he said, well, I grew up in a Leave It to Beaver family. And people just thought, oh, he was on Leave It to Beaver or something about Leave It to Beaver, and that's how it actually started. Now you don't have to worry about it anymore.
This gentleman here in the hat?
Were you able to retain any of your wardrobe, or did that all go back to the wardrobe?
Actually, that all went back to the wardrobe department, but, and not only did it go back, they had, for every one of us, now for adults, they usually only have the outfit twice, because if you go out and have a cup of coffee and spill it, they have to have it. But for the kids, we had 5 of everything. So every shirt you see, I had 4 of, and the one I had on, just in case I went out, because Tony Dow and I would go out and throw footballs around and run around, and the wardrobe man was always chasing us, don't fall on your knees, don't fall on your knees.
Tony Dow wasn't the original Wally in the pilot,
Well,
right?
no, the pilot had a different Wally, and for whatever reason, one of the reasons was he was the original Wally, and I can't remember his name right now, I'm sorry. He was about 5 feet something when we did the pilot. Now, it took about 8 or 9 months, and he grew 8 inches, and he was almost as tall as Barbara.
Yeah, we couldn't have that.
Well, Tony and I did the same thing, but they put Barbara in high heels, and that's always the big question. Why was Barbara vacuuming in high heels? Because otherwise we were bigger than her.
Next question.
I was always going to want to know if Ward and June were parent figures when the cameras were on. And I get the gist from just hearing all this that they were.
Well, they were, but it would be much more like your favorite teacher. As I say, Hugh Beaumont was a Methodist minister and preaching down in the slums of L.A. Barbara Billingsley was a New York model, but they were just the most gracious and wonderful people. If you were having a hard day, or if, Hugh was a director of a lot of the shows, and he would come around and say, it'd be better if you did it this way, but they were like a teacher, but also like not a grandparent or a parent, but just a really good friend. They treated us as equals, though. I mean, it wasn't like I was a child and they were and Hugh Beaumont, Barbara had an extensive career, but I think the interesting part is Michael Shane, if you've ever heard of him, is this really hard-nosed detective that pounds people on a wall. That's Ward. Hugh Beaumont in real life was a Methodist minister. Now, he didn't like pounding people up against the wall to get information, but when he talked to the Beaver a lot of times, I think you saw that minister come out.
Definitely. Yeah, again.
One more question, I'm always curious. When you were on the dating date,
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
the girl chose you.
That's right.
On the date, and did it go anywhere?
We went to Europe, but the problem...
Yeah, it was a trip to England, wasn't it?
It was a trip to England, and it was a wonderful trip, and I was over 18. She was supposed to be over 18. She looked over 18. She was 16. So for her, they had to send 3 chaperones.
It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it didn't go very far. The chaperones are cute, though.
You had another question?
I enjoyed that every episode had a lesson to it also.
Absolutely. It was written that way.
Now, a couple questions for her.
Sure.
Now, you actually played Gus, the old fireman.
Gus the fireman.
I enjoyed
was very good. He had never been an actor until he was over, I think it was 65 or 66 years old. He had been a salesman all his life, and then he started doing little theater, and somebody said, "You're so good." It was in the Los Angeles area, and he went on an interview, and he became, I think he was, I forget, was it Beverly Hills? He was on a lot of shows, but as Gus the Fireman, I think he really shined. And he really liked being able to talk to the kids. So when you sat there and talked to him, he was just a wonderful, interesting person.
Yes, sir.
Any thoughts on poking fun of yourself on Married with Children?
No, that's fun. Married with Children, they're really good friends of mine. And, you know when you sign the contract what you're getting into. And it's just fun. I mean, I know everybody thinks, oh, well, how could you let them say that about you? If you don't realize that they're poking fun at me, then you don't know me very well. And that's just what they do, and they're really good people.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh. They did a wonderful job, but I don't think I'd let them do it again. Well, you know what? We would rehearse it for 2 days. It really, honestly, I don't want to burst your little bubble, but it really wasn't my hair. They had to have a skull cap, and the reason was they had been happy to cut my hair, but then they would have had to show the shows in that order as it grew back. And because they couldn't do that, because if it was like a Memorial Day weekend or a holiday weekend, there were certain times, we did 39 a year, there were certain times that they said, this is when these shows have to play because we get a better audience, so that's why.
I've got to tell you, you got me into trouble with that episode.
Oh, I'm sure I did.
Because
I thought I got it from you.
I cut my own hair.
Yeah.
I cut a big hunk out of my hair right about here. And my mother, God rest her soul, she'd been gone for 21 years, she never forgave me that it happened 2 days before picture day in grade 2.
Oh, that's good. You had your
True
own
story.
look. You had your own
I
look.
did. I had my own luck. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned that your brothers and sisters got into business. Was there any sibling rivalry because you couldn't start? And also, did you ever encourage or discourage your own kids to get into the business?
Well, my son is a sound man. One of my daughters, my oldest daughter, my son's the oldest, he's a sound man. She works for Netflix. She's an executive with Netflix. My other daughter is a teacher. So we kind of, my dad was a principal, vice principal, and ended up as a superintendent. So we kind of sprinkle them into all different employments. But I didn't discourage them. I think they realized, though, growing up, when you're an actor, as a child, now this wasn't true, when I did the original Leave It to Beaver, a child can only work basically from 8 to 5 or 9 to 6. The problem is when you're an adult actor and if you're working with children, you do everything with the kid and do all the close-ups, and then at 6 o'clock when they go home, you go to dinner, and then you're there till 8 or 9 o'clock because you have to go back to each set and relight it and do all that stuff. So it's a fun life, but it's a lot more work. Leave It to Beaver, each episode took a week to do, and they're long days, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work.
And a lot of children on those sets as well.
And but you do have a welfare worker, so I mean, she will, if it's right coming up to either the lunch break or time to go home, that welfare worker, who is also your teacher, will walk right through the camera, even if they've said, this is the last take. Nope, she walks right up there and grabs your little hand and says, sorry, time's up, bam, you're gone. Because that's what she's there for. A child is only, by the labor laws, is only allowed to work 8 hours a day with an hour for lunch and then so many breaks.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a story behind the disappearance of the character of Larry?
Yes, his parents, his dad was an executive, and I can't remember what the chain was, but it was one of the larger retailers, and he got moved to, I believe, Houston, and so the parents moved, and he went with his parents. I mean, it wasn't like he was going to stay here and the whole family would move. So, and he was a very, very good character. It wasn't like people always say, "Oh, there must have been some big. What did he do? Did you not get along?" We were all good friends, and it was a sad time. In fact, we never really replaced him because it was too hard.
Did he ever act again after that?
He did a few things. I think he did a few movies, but he moved out of, honestly, if you're an actor and you're not either in Los Angeles or New York, you can be an actor in name, but you're probably not going to work until you go to one of those. And I forget, but his parents moved wherever his dad went, and it was not one of those two places.
We didn't end up with a different Larry Mondello.
No, you know what? They tried. They had other friends for me, but he was just such an iconic character, and they were very smart, I think. They didn't want to bring in just someone else who was, heavy set with the red hair and the freckles. They said, no, we'll just say he moved away, which does happen in real life, and we'll have other people. But, he was very iconic, but I can understand. His dad was, the whole family moved. They didn't want to have to live here for 39 weeks and then just go back and see the family.
And that, of course, led to another lesson about the friend moving.
The friend moving, and how when they move, and there's nothing you could do about it. That's the way the world is.
Another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, you did some recordings in the 60s.
I had a band, Beaver and the Trappers. In fact, that's a lot of what I did during that time, because after Leave It to Beaver, I was very, very lucky because it happened to end when I was a freshman in high school. And a good friend of mine, and he's on the show too, his name on the show is Richard Rickover, but his real name is Richard Carell. He was a drummer, and we would always kind of fool around. And we started in high school, and like our sophomore year, we saw that there were a lot of places that you could play, like dances and things like that. So we started a band called Beaver and the Trappers. I was the lead singer, he was the drummer, and we had some friends that played guitar. So it wasn't any, and I did cut records. I cut a few records for Atlantic, but I'm sure none of you have ever seen them because they sold all right back then. But it was just a lot of fun. So that's what I did kind of as a creative endeavor when I was in high school, is I would go around and play at different schools.
What kind of music and artists do you like?
I still like rock and roll. I like jazz, but I still like rock and roll probably the best. I'm pretty much a contemporary. Luckily, I have kids, so I can say, play that music some more. And they go, but Dad, that's our music. I don't care. Play it some more.
Yes.
I could be misremembering, and forgive me if I am, but were you ever on Circus with the Stars?
No. They never got me on a high bars or anything. I've done a lot of those things, though. They used to have a lot of competitions, and that was always fun too, where they'd take the Leave It to Beaver family, and that's probably it. Because the only really hard part about this, or doing it, was a lot of people don't know this, but Tony Dow, the reason he got the part on Leave It to Beaver was an Olympic trainee for the Olympics in swimming and diving. So here I am, I'm working on a show. I don't know a lot of other kids. Here's this guy that's playing my other older brother. He can walk 5 steps, jump up in the air, do a front flip, and land on his feet. And I'm thinking, I can't do that. I bet everybody can do that. Why can't I do that?
Gentleman in the white shirt at the back.
He's probably, you're not going to like this, but he's probably the nicest person on the show, unless you're driving in LA and you've been drinking, because he's an LAPD cop. Now you have to remember, and he picked by choice the worst. LA is a very nice place, but like any city, we have some very bad places. Here comes Eddie Haskell. He comes up on a motorcycle, pulls you over and says, roll down your window. And it's Eddie Haskell. And people look at him and go, is this a joke? If you want to laugh, it is, but you're getting a ticket.
Yes, ma'am.
The Trouble with Harry. That was Shirley MacLaine's first movies. John Forsythe, I think it was his second movie. I'd already been in several. I'm not trying to brag, but I had. But it was very, very fun because we got to go to Stowe, Vermont. And the fun part was every day, the whole theater, it costs a lot of money. You probably figure taking 120 to 140 people to Vermont, to Stowe, Vermont, and the whole thing was supposed to be the changing of the leaves. So they got there and they thought the leaves were going to change within the first week. And the people were going, oh no, you came too early. Wait till tomorrow. Every day we waited for tomorrow. So here's this whole cast and crew. We're all there having a wonderful time, eating on Mr. Hitchcock, all these catered lunches. After a week and a half, he said, no, we're starting tomorrow. And they said, no, the leaves will be, so we're starting tomorrow. Huge thunderstorm came in, knocked every leaf off every tree. People, what they call the grips, who are like the carpenters and the handymen, were up in the trees with stapling guns, stapling on the leaves, so it would look like it was fall in Vermont.
And that wasn't a typical Hitchcock horror film. It was more of what they call a black comedy.
It was a black comedy. It was one of his first. And I was very, very lucky because when we were doing Leave It to Beaver, I had already met Mr. Hitchcock. That was before I did Leave It to Beaver. And when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, he was doing Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So he would come in and he would do, and this is not because it was Hitchcock, everybody does it, steel sets, because he didn't have. So if you ever watch Alfred Hitchcock's Presents, every once in a while, if you look, it'll look a lot different, but it's the Cleaver's living room or the Cleaver's den, because they would go in and put in different furniture, but they didn't want to build a set just for him to come in for a day, and he'd do like maybe 20s, hello, yes, it's Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and do his whole thing. And then, so I got to see him a lot even after doing the movie with him.
Yes, sir, in the hat again?
Those, you will see the Beaver home and that street all over the place. Now, we did MCA, which is Music Corporation of America, but they're also the biggest filmmaker, but they started out as a record company. We were at what they call Republic Studios, which is now Review. So that's why we had the first house, and then all of a sudden the Cleavers moved. Well, every series that was being made at that time moved because they bought Universal Studios. So the Review became a live lot. They did all the things that go out right over the air, and Universal became their film lot. So that's why we switched houses. And if you can go back to movies starting in, I think it's 1935, and see the Leave It to Beaver house and that street. It's called Colonial Street. But you look and, that's the Leave It to Beaver house.
There was also a move from CBS to ABC. Why did that happen?
Just because the sponsors, you have sponsors, and what the sponsors do is they say, we had like GE and quite a few different sponsors, but the sponsors then say, we want to sponsor your show. And you say, okay, but one of the clauses is it has to be on one of the 3 major networks. Now, for whatever their product is, they say, what time would you like it to air to each one, and then they get a price, and then they haggle back and forth. So it's the actual sponsor who picks the network because it's wherever they feel they get the best deal.
Interesting. Yes, sir.
Can you tell the story about being able to work on The Corpse and Psycho, the mother?
Oh, yes. When I was doing Leave It to Beaver, and you'll see his name, of course, most people don't read them, but his name is Bob Don, and he was our makeup artist. But everybody liked working on Leave It to Beaver because when you're working on a series and you're an adult actor, it comes 5 o'clock, you just keep on working. They give you an hour and you may be there until the thing's gone. Children, if they come in at 8, they have to go by 5, 9, 6. So everyone wanted to work as far as the cast, not the cast, but the crew on Leave It to Beaver, because most of them were family people and they wanted to go home to their families. So Bob was the head makeup artist, Bob Don. So he did things like Psycho, all of the Creature of the Black Lagoon. But the very first few shows, one of them I had to have a black eye. Well, that was his specialty, all the specialty makeup. He came onto our show and found out, gee, if you work on Leave It to Beaver, the kids go home at 5, they shoot a few things with the parents, you're home by 6. The other shows, you're there till 8 or 9 at night. Everybody wanted to work on our show.
Let's see. Yes.
Hey, Jerry. I'm just curious. You were on one of the best shows of the early 60s. Did you have any of your own favorite shows from the 60s?
You know, I honestly, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't. And not that I didn't have favorite, I liked Maverick, I liked a lot of them, but I pretty much, from the time I was about 6 years old until I was well into my teens, I had an 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 job, and when I got home, I would study my lines. I also had homework because I had a private tutor, and it's a very, very good education. But, you know, you have to know what you're doing because your teacher doesn't have all the people you can hide behind or ask somebody, what's the answer to that one? So you have to know everything. So it was a very, not rigorous schedule, but no, I didn't honestly watch a lot of TV.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering I just got, I don't know if the question was already asked, but do you know the story behind the actual casting of the show, and where did you come in?
Well, the actual casting, there were, and you're going to find this a little hard to believe. I do, but this is the truth. There were 6,000 people, but that wasn't just for the cast of Beaver. That was Wally, Beaver, Eddie, Lumpy, so it was, and Barbara and Hugh, or the parents. But what you have to realize is, with all those kids coming through, then it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, because I was the first one picked. But then they wanted to get a Wally. In fact, the person that did the Wally for the original episode, if you buy the DVD set, once in a while I think TV Land may play it, but there's a different Wally. But the trouble was, between the time that we did the original show and we came back and got 39 to do as a series, he went from being about 5'2" to about 6'2". And he was really a very big Wally. In fact, he was taller than Hugh Beaumont. And that's when Tony Dow came in. So in the original series, Hugh Beaumont was not in it. And it was Barbara and myself were the only two people from the original series.
Is it true you auditioned in your Cub Scout uniform?
I did. Because
that's just brilliant.
well, it wasn't even brilliant. It was me being stubborn because I, as an actor, had worked a lot. I did movies, as I say, with all these different people and was working a lot. And I joined the Cub Scouts, and the Cub Scout master said, now, if you don't come to all the meetings, you're going to not be in. Not just me. He told that to everybody. So my mom said, okay, Jerry, you know what? We have a call for this show. And I said, oh, I can't go. My mom said, what do you mean? It's a series. What do you mean you can't go? So I've got my Cub Scout meeting. And she said, well, you know, your Cub Scout meeting isn't till like maybe 2 hours after school. Maybe, or I forget, I think it was the interview was right away after school, and the Cub Scout meeting was a little later. And so she said, well, we'll just go there, and I'll make sure you get to your Cub Scout meeting on time. Well, we got there, and there were about probably 10, it was down, the original, between Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, they had almost 800 children on, but it wasn't just for the Beaver. It was Wally, Eddie, Lumpy. So there were all these different kinds of kids, and then it was just like, and they'd bring you in, and they'd say, oh, that one might be good together, this one might be good together. So we went in and in and in, and I said, well, I'm tired. I want to go to my meeting. She said, no, but we'll, and so I got into this thing, and we've been going for weeks and weeks, and the producers knew me pretty well. They said, what's the matter, Jerry? And I said, well, I don't want to be here. They went, what do you mean you don't want to be here? I said, well, I have a Cub Scout meeting, and I'm going to be late. And I don't like to be late. They said, go. So I walk in and I walk out. My mom said, Jerry, what happened? I said, well, I asked them if I could leave, and they said, yes. She said, Jerry, we've been on this interview. They called that night, and they said, I had the job.
Well, that was such a perfect Beaver thing to say.
That's what they wanted. They wanted somebody more like a real kid than an actor that said, I'll stay here forever.
Gentleman in the blue shirt.
Could you tell us more about the controversy surrounding the fact that your show was allegedly the first time its toilet was seen?
Well, it wasn't allegedly. It absolutely was the first time even a restroom was seen. They have, and I can't remember the person's name, but there's a person that it's named after, and there are a lot of things that you can't show on television. And one of them was a bathroom. On the original show, Beaver and Wally go to a carnival, and Beaver wins an alligator. But Ward has already told them that they can't have a pet. So they decide, oh, well, we'll bring it home since we've won it, and we'll take care of it, and we're going to take such good care of it. Now, when you bring an alligator home, the guy at the carnival said, you have to give it water. So we said, oh, well, we'll keep it in the toilet tank. Well, the producers didn't know that. I mean, they were knowledgeable, but not that knowledgeable. And they just said, oh, okay, we'll put it in the toilet tank. Censors saw that and they went, I beg your pardon? We don't show bathrooms on television. And they went, but where can you hide an alligator? So they compromised, and if you watch, it never shows the bowl. It only shows the top of the tank with the alligator swimming in it.
Seems so quaint.
Yeah, times
looking
have
back.
changed. You see a lot more now.
Yeah.
So when you did the new Leave It to Beaver
Yes.
series, you knew that the cast was returning. Did you guys have the same writers and crew?
No, the original writers had passed. They were actually very interesting. They originally wrote Amos and Andy on radio, and that's what they were famous for. And then they wrote Leave It to Beaver and went on to write the Munsters and a whole lot of other things that they did. So no, it was a whole new deal.
And did you find a big difference between, when you did the first series and when you did the second? The whole studio system was different? Or
The studio system wasn't different. I was different because I wasn't the Beaver anymore. Now I was the father and had to put up with all that stuff.
Looking back for the original series, do you have a favorite episode, whether it's being proud of that particular episode or whether it's a favorite episode having been involved in shooting?
I think it would be the second. It'd be the involved in shooting, but not only because of being involved in shooting. I mean, there was always fun ones like when we'd go to the amusement park or like when we'd have a special pet on, like an alligator is the very first show. So there were always things like that. I always liked a lot of the character actors that they brought in because they were so much fun. I mean, Edgar Buchanan was on it, and he played Uncle Billy, and played actually a couple parts. He was our uncle, and then he was something else, and everybody kind of went, Captain Jack. He was Captain Jack. That was our very first episode. They found out how good he was, and they said, yeah, well, now he's not a Captain Jack. Now he's going to be your uncle.
What about the soup episode?
Well, the soup episode I love because it's, for any of you that maybe have forgotten it, there's a billboard that's about as high up as those two speakers, and in the center of it, there's a soup bowl. And I think it's Larry, it may be one of my other cohorts, but it says, I wonder if there's really soup up there because there was steam coming out of it. And so who else would go up there and find out except the Beaver? I think it was a coffee cup now that I think about it. I'm not sure if it was soup or coffee. A long time ago. But anyway, so I fall in and can't get out. The fire department has to come and Ward comes down there. So it was a lot of fun though, because for that particular episode, I had to go to school when I was doing Leave It to Beaver, but it took them about a half hour with a crane to be able, and I was snugged in and put things on my shoulders and lift me up there, put me in the coffee cup. So I got to miss school for 3 days. I had to make it up the next week though and do double school.
Time for one or two more questions. Yep.
Yes, Beaver and the Trappers.
Was it along like surf music or Frankie Avalon type music?
It was sock hop music. So it's basically dance music, and we would go to all in our general area, and we would play some private parties, but not very many. It was mostly usually Friday night sock hop at the school in the gymnasium, and then just by chance, I did one of the schools. One of the people that was, and I don't even know what his particular title was, but he worked for Atlantic Records, and he said, would you like to make a record with us? So I did have one record, and it did fairly well. It was rock and roll, and we had just a really good time, but that's what I did. Not really, I'd hate to say it was a creative outlet, because a lot of people would say that was rock and roll, that's not creative, but it really was. But we were just a regular teenage band, and we played all the local hits.
One last question. Yes, sir.
When you were filming the final season, did you all pretty much know that was going to be the last year, or do you think it could have gone on?
Well, it could have gone on. There were a couple of things that happened, but one of them was I had never been to regular school. I had a private tutor, and not just from Leave It to Beaver, because I was in the first grade, I was doing movies. But so I had never been in school with any other children, except sometimes when the kids would come on, they would come in, excuse me, and my teacher would teach them. But on a day in and day out basis, I had a teacher. My dad's superintendent. They had the best teacher for whatever grade I was in. Same with Tony. He was in high school, so he had a different teacher. So after 6 years, most series don't go on because all the actors are going. When you come in and they make your deal with you, they say it's a series. Would you like to sign it? And I've been in a lot of pilots that you sign it and you never do it again. So you get as much money as you can, but they say this is only the first one. We can't, give you a lot of money. So you do it for 6 years, and then everybody wants a lot of money. And we were all pretty not tired of doing it, but Barbara and Hugh had families. Tony was going to college. I was going into high school. It seemed like the perfect time to just say adios. It's been fun, and there's 234 shows, so they can show them every day. And almost a year it'll run.
Jerry, my last question for you.
Okay.
Was it ever difficult for you post Leave It to Beaver, the original series, living up to what people expected of you as Jerry Mathers?
No, it wasn't. The hardest part, I think, and especially the producers and my parents, I had never been to a regular school until high school. So I went the first through the 8th grade with a private tutor, either on a movie I was doing or Leave It to Beaver. So that was the kind of the things that people, and Tony was the same way. I started high school, he started college. So it wasn't hard because about 4 weeks before my freshman year started, I went out for the football team. And they had pre-football, and I made the team. When you're on the football team, you know all the biggest guys in the whole school. Nobody's going to mess with you.
I just want to say that it's been an honor to host this session with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I'm so impressed at where you are today as a 71-year-old who grew up on one of the most iconic series of all time. Let's hear it for Jerry Mathers.
Thank you very much.